Have you ever wondered why you need a buyer agent? You might hear, oh, you should use a buyer agent. Don't buy a house without a buyer agent. And you're like, I don't need a buyer agent. I am not paying anybody extra money to buy a house because it's already so expensive. We get that all the time here in real estate. And buyer agency has been around since the early 2000s. It's really come into play a lot more prominently, and actually brought up more questions for buyers since the settlement last year. And that was a big deal. And now, if you want to see a property with me, so if I'm going to take you into a home and I'm an agent and you're a buyer, there has to be some kind of agreement that we sign together that says how I'm getting compensated. It's a rule. And if buyers know this, sometimes they avoid agents altogether and just go to open houses or call the listing agent. And honestly, you're walking into a pit of fire sometimes and you just don't know it. So, what I want to do is I'm going to do more of these videos. I'm going to give you more information on what buyer agents actually do, what sometimes they should do and don't do, what your experiences might have been, because there have been a lot of bad experiences, I will admit, like with some agents who may not know their way around either the forms, the rules, or how to actually, the most important thing, help buyers. So as a buyer agent, we're supposed to do a really good job for our buyers. But one of the things that, so if we meet, and often this is out at a property, right? We're like meeting and it's like, oh, by the way, before we go into the property, I have to have you sign this form. And the form states how I'm getting compensated. So let's say, for example, and I have to say, for example, because we are not supposed to talk about the fees that we charge buyers. Like we can't talk about this within age with other agents. We're not supposed to talk about this out there in the real world. Like there's a lot of rules that um so that's why sometimes when people ask about it, like we are kind of locked down with some silly rules and some things we can't share. So I have to give you an example. So say there's a 3% buyer agency fee that I'm going to collect when you close on this property and the house is $500,000. So $500,000, $15,000 buyer agency fee. Now, where does that fee go? Well, part of it goes to me, part of it goes to my company, and that would be the money that I use to pay my expenses as being a real estate agent, to pay for my trainings and everything. And it's not cheap to be a real estate agent. And it pays for my gas, it pays for my time, right? So everybody gets paid by the hour. Not everybody. So a lot of people get paid by the hour. You expect a paycheck at the end of the week. We don't get paid by the hour. We don't get paid until closing. So if you never close on a property, I'm not getting paid, and that's okay. It doesn't mean I should force you to buy a property. That's not how this is supposed to work. It just is an explanation of why we're getting paid. So I'm getting paid to represent you. I'm coming out, I'm showing you a property. I am working with you, bringing you into the property, doing the due diligence with you if I'm representing you as a buyer agent. I'm digging for more information. I'm gathering resources for you. I'm doing the work for you, not for the seller, for you. If you walk into a house and it's the listing agent is only working for the seller. They're not working for you at all. They can put a contract together, sure. They can get to closing with you, sure. But there is nothing that they're doing that is representing you if you're just walking in and they've never met you before and there's no buyer agency agreement enforced. So so let's go back to the example, the money, right? So $500,000, $15,000 buyer agency fee that's split between the buyer agent and their company and takes care of expenses and everything that a buyer agent incurs. Okay, so the $15,000, you go, that's a lot of money. And I go in and I'm like, okay, this property is on the market for $500,000. And I look around and now I'm using my educated information. Okay. I'm using my eyes. I'm using my knowledge. I'm using the things that I know, market value. all the properties I've been in, I can see where this property comps. And I might say to you, this property isn't worth more than 440 at best. And you're like, well, why do they have it listed for 500,000? And there's a variety of reasons. I'm not going to get into that right now, but I want you to understand the money part. So I have the keen sense of what my market pricing is. Market pricing is different in the Lakes region, in town in the Lakes region versus lakefront in the Lakes region versus Southern New Hampshire versus Northern New Hampshire. And I know this for a fact because I worked in the Southern New Hampshire region. Bedford was my hometown. It's where I raised my kids. It was my backyard for a long time. I know that market inside and out, and I research it all the time. So I'm still very much in tune with the Bedford, Southern New Hampshire market. I'm also um, I had businesses in the White Mountains in Carroll, Twin Mountain. So I know that market because I worked up there. I know how that market operates. I've been in the Lakes region. We've been coming here since the 1990s. I've always researched the Lakes region, and I've been working in the Lakes region 5 or 6 years now. And this is my home, and this is the market that I'm in all the time. This is where I'm up to date on all my pricing. I know the different towns around the lake all command different pricing. It's wild. People are like, how can this house be this much in this town and this much in this town, especially when they're not from the area? Or they're like, well, that's how much it is now, but it's not always going to be that much, and expecting a huge price drop, especially on lakefront property. Um, we see price adjustments, but right now we're in a transitional market. So back to my example, $500,000, 15,000 buyer agency fee. And I'm walking in the property and I'm going, this property isn't worth more than 440. And you're like, yeah, but they want 500,000 for it. I'm like, yeah, but we don't have to offer that. I can write up an offer for any amount that you want to. If you wanted to write it up for 350, we could. I don't always recommend it, but some situations warrant it. I'm one of those agents, I'll write up an offer for anything. I have to justify it in our conversation so I know where you're coming from when I present it. But I'm working for you, at least in this particular property. So if you're saving $60,000 because you're paying me 15, that's a net win for you of $45,000 if you get the house at that price. Like if you go directly to the listing agent, and I'm going to use this example, and when I do have a listing and it is a listing that a buyer comes to me on, I work for the seller. So now I'm going to play the seller's part. So you walk into a listing and the seller is representing, the listing agent's representing the seller. You're talking to the listing agent and you say, what do you think this house is really worth? And they say, well, it's listed for 500,000. And you're like, yeah, but it doesn't seem like it's worth that. And you're like, well, that's what the seller wants. That's what it's for sale for. So as a listing agent, I'm not going to help you figure out where the market really is. I'm here to sell this property for my seller. And either the seller picked the price or I showed the seller the price for the market. But at any rate, we're still in the market for 500,000. So you might say, well, tell them I'm offering, and now you're going to be careful because if you really like the property, you're not going to go to your lowest number. You're just not. If it's a crazy number and you feel like maybe it's only worth that, most buyers, there are some savvy buyers who'll do it, but have a hard time holding it if they emotionally are attached to the house. Some buyers might throw out, "Nah, how about, do you, how about 475? Do you think they take 475? Already there's a $35,000 gap of what a buyer agent will come in and see potentially, well, at least me, and what you're willing to offer. Because when you're standing in the hot seat and you are going up against the listing agent, if the listing agent is good, they're going to hold that price. They're going to hold your feet to the fire, especially if they know you like the property. And it's really hard to hide liking a property. There are so many tells after being in this business a long time. I can tell. I just know. I know by the way people walk around. I know what they look at. I know the questions that they ask. I know their level of interest based on just a handful of tells. It's like playing poker. Right? So like you get good at what you do and it's hard. So even when sellers, even when buyers try to be really savvy and play down their level of interest, it's obvious to me. And so I work for the seller. So if you're coming up against me in my listing and you want a lower price, it's going to be hard to get there, harder than a lot of agents, but I can present anything to the seller, but I can also have a conversation with you and it might look like this. You go, I'll offer 460. I'm like, let me text the seller. I text the seller. Buyer says 460 and the seller says, can they afford more? And I say yes. And they're like, do they like the house? And I say yes. And they're like, no. I'm like, seller said no to 460. 475. You take 475, 75. And the seller just wants to know the same information. No, they really like the house. Do you think they can afford 500,000? I'm like, yeah, I do, actually. Um, and and we've had some conversation in between that, you and I. And so my goal is to get you as close to that 500 number as possible. That's my goal. That's my job. That's what the seller hired me for, is to sell that property. And if you find value in that number and you're willing to pay $500,000, then it is my job to write that up for you. So I can. What buyers don't know, and this happens, like this is information that's hardly out there, and that's why I'm sharing with you. What buyers don't know is a lot of times if you go to a seller unrepresented, okay, you just walked in, you're working with a listing agent, you don't have a buyer agent, that seller, two things, might be willing to pay a buyer agency fee, right? So there's a place in the contract for that if the seller is going to offer any compensation for a buyer agent. So you might not have to pay 3% for your buyer agent. Maybe the seller will pay a portion. The other thing is, if the seller's not paying a portion to a buyer agent, the seller might be paying a portion to the listing agent. So now the listing agent is getting paid by the seller even more to negotiate against you as a buyer. And I'm going to stop right there because I think that's really important that you know that and you have to process that information. Happy to jump on a call with you, but you need to know that there's a lot of things. If you aren't thinking about using a buyer agent, there's a lot of pieces that you're missing that happen behind the scenes that once you know, you can actually be better protected by using a buyer agent than you ever thought possible. And you might save a lot more money. My name is Michelle Pallas. I'm with eXp Realty Lakes Region Group in Guilford. My office is in Village West. I would love to have a further conversation with you. You don't have to hire me um, for a long period of time. Even if you just want to hire me, I usually, when I meet people, I write up a contract for the day. I don't know that I want to work with you, and you don't know that you want to work with me, but I'm showing you property. So let's just write a contract for the day and see how it goes, and we can go from there. And that means if you buy any houses that you saw while you were out with me on that particular day, you want to make any offers, they go through me. If after that day you don't want to work with me, you're not interested in those houses, you just want to move on, that's totally fine. There are ways that you do not have to get sucked into a contract. I know some buyer agents, they'll shove a contract in somebody's face for a year and you'll sign it and you don't know what you're signing. And then you're all of a sudden you have a buyer agent who you don't even know or you don't even know how they work. You just wanted to see a house one day and you get stuck. So don't put yourself in those positions. But let's have a conversation. If I can help you, I definitely would love to help you. Michelle Pallas, eXp Realty. Talk to you soon.